All right, here we go. All right, so thanks everyone for coming. This is the science of death and decomposition. We're going to be talking, like I mentioned earlier, about why this is so important and just how this happens and what it does to an ecosystem and kind of the long-term effects of this. So we're going to get to the nitty-gritty stuff today. This is one's a little bit longer just because I have quite a few pictures, but just letting everybody know, I do have some kind of graphic photos on here, but I do have a disclaimer for all of you. It is science, and so I feel like we're all adults, and so hopefully we can get through this. So, all right. So just letting everyone know, I hope you have comments and I hope you have questions. Please feel free to put those in the chat and we'll kind of get to those questions at the end if we have any. But just a reminder to everyone that be kind to everyone and keep on topic if you do have questions or comments that you use in the chat. So. All right. I also want to point out I am by no means an expert in probably anything. But definitely not death and decomposition. I have not been studying it for 40 plus years, but I do a lot of research for these programs and I am an expert in science communication. So taking that information and making it digestible and accessible and applicable to people. So that's what we're going to be doing today is taking a bunch of other people's research and information that I found, but then making it understandable for the public, the general public to understand what's going on. So. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Again, I just want to point out to people that we are talking about death and decomposition today. So presentation does contain images and discussions of death and natural decomposition for animals. There's no people information on here, but just letting people know that there are some kind of graphic or sometimes unsettling photos. So I just wanted to point that out before we get started today. If you feel uncomfortable and you need to walk away or turn your video off or leave, I absolutely understand that as well. So like I said, these will be recorded and I will be putting them on YouTube on our Game and Parks Education YouTube channel if you would like to watch later, and then you can kind of skip through the parts that you don't want to see. So the goal of this presentation is not to make you unsettled or it's not to make you uncomfortable, but it's just to kind of show and understand the science and the ecological importance of death and decomposition in nature and those long-term effects that it has. So just reminding everyone before we get going. So, all right, so let's go ahead and get started. So one of the things that we always think about is death as like the end. It's definitely not. It's only the beginning when we talk about really anything, and especially the ecosystem. So I recently watched the really good 1997 version of The Mummy. And in The Mummy, they talk about when he's being eaten by all the souls and everything, he reminds people that death is only the beginning. So that's kind of what I had in my head. I tried to find a cool meme and a GIF, and I couldn't find a good one, but just so that you kind of know like what I was thinking about. So, so why are we talking about this topic? What made me choose a science of? So basically, what happens when an animal dies? Death is not the end, but it actually fuels life in ecosystems. So basically, what we're saying is that ecosystems need death. And that sounds dark, but it is a way for this whole loop, this cyclical loop, to help keep going. So during this presentation, we're going to explore natural decomposition and its role within the ecosystem. So talking about the process of decomposition, which organisms are going to be involved, and then overall, why does it matter? So the takeaway today, I hope that you understand that death in nature is not the end, but it's a vital step in the life cycle of the continuous ecosystem. All right, so death is a part of life. When people usually think about death, their first kind of thing that they think about, or their first reaction is kind of ew, or oh my gosh, I don't want to talk about that. But really what we need to is, in nature, decomposition isn't something to shy away from. It's one of the most important processes that actually keeps the planet alive. So every leaf that falls, every animal that dies, every bit of that organic matter will break down eventually, and it becomes the foundation for new life to grow. So decomposition is in many ways nature's ultimate recycling program. All right, so like I mentioned, it's a recycling program. You take something that was used and you use it again. So the earth takes what's no longer living and it turns it back into nutrients that sustain basically everything else. So without the process, it's constantly running in the background. Ecosystems would eventually choke out and die under these layers of undecomposed material. So the soil would become depleted. There would be no more nutrients for plants and life to grow. Thus nothing for animals to eat and nothing for other other animals to eat and nothing for in the cycle of stuff. So again, it's one big loop. It is not this linear straight line of you born and you die. There's other things that happen. So every living thing basically is just borrowed energy, energy that officially has to be returned so something else can use it. So isn't that like the first law of thermodynamics is that energy is not created or destroyed. It's just moved around basically in different ways. So for an instance, when a tree falls in the forest, the fungi, the bacteria, they start to break down those insects and worms. They join in, and that tree basically slowly transforms into that rich soil that will feed then new saplings. So and all is just this balance exchange. Nothing in nature is ultimately wasted. I can't say the same for people that do that. We waste a lot, but nature, nothing is ever wasted. All right, so here's just a picture of, it's not just animals. When we talk about death in nature, it's plants, it is trees, it is other types of living material rather than just animals. So thinking about it, here's a tree. Obviously, it looks like it has been chopped down, but new life is growing from it. So looking at all the things that are breaking that down. So there's moss on there, there's other plants growing out of there. You have all that stuff on there like the leaves that are slowly going to be decomposed over time. You have the fungi on there. So all those different things are doing a really good job at either breaking down that tree to make something else or growing already from that old stump. All right, so what actually happens in the moment of death? I'm pretty sure we all get it. We die. We're not existing anymore. But biologically, what is happening? So when an animal dies, not a plant, but when an animal dies, the heart stops beating, your breathing will not continue, that oxygen is no longer being carried to the rest of the body, so your cells and your tissues are basically being choked out. The cells begin to break down internally. So there's an immediate ecological impact. So right away, what's happening is it signals the start of that decomposition. So right away, there's going to be scavengers that would like to come. It attracts things like vultures, coyotes, raccoons. So why does it matter? Basically, death is triggering this chain reaction in the ecosystem. So it's providing energy, it's providing nutrients to other organisms, and it maintains the balance of nature by returning that life to the soil, to the environment, so that new things can grow from it. When we talk about this decomposition, it's not also just those big scavengers. It's going to be things like flies and beetles and small insects. And it creates that foundation for that nutrient recycling to start occurring. All right, so when an animal dies in the wild, its carcass becomes this focal point of an intriguing, what we call a micro ecosystem. So that carcass in and itself is an ecosystem. It's providing shelter, it's providing food, it's providing nutrients to the soil, to insects, to other animals. So it becomes an ecosystem in itself. It supports various life forms. It each contribute then to the breakdown and recycling of those nutrients. So everything that feeds on that, basically what's happening is that they're contributing to that process of the ecosystem. It's a temporary ecosystem, we have to remember that, but it materializes almost immediately after death. So it draws in a succession of organisms. They thrive on the resources until there's nothing left, and then they scatter again. One thing that I found that was really neat in nature, on average, only about 10% of the deceased animal is actually consumed. So what happens to the other 90% of it? It eventually just decomposes into organic matter known as detritus. The decomposition is a very vital process. It releases nutrients, like I've talked about, back into the organ or back into the ecosystem, into the soil, and then it feeds that plants and supports that biodiversity. All right, so here's a couple pictures. This one's actually, the last one was too. This one's from Nebraska. We talked about how when an animal dies, like immediately things are happening. So things are happening even though we can't see it. One of our biologists sent this to me from out western Nebraska. This is an elk. One of the things I thought was interesting is that they determined that this elk has been dead about a week, but nothing's feeding on it. That's really strange. Usually at this point in time, this is like a hub for lots of different types of animals, and this is food. They believe that nothing's feeding on it because determined that the elk died from CWD or chronic wasting disease. So they think that nothing wants to eat it. That's why. All right, so just talking a little bit about just the stages of decomposition and what this looks like. So in animal decomposition, you have different timelines. So if you've ever seen like a CSI or I can't think of those any crime shows when they talk about this person or this creature has been dead this long because they're in this stage of decomposition. That's kind of what we're talking about. So we call the first stage the fresh stage. I did not name these also, by the way, the fresh stage. So this is cell death. Enzymes start to break down. The tissues basically just stop. It begins immediately after death. The heart stops. The cells are deprived of oxygen. Self-digestion begins. The body temperature will drop to match the environment because there's no more warm blood. There's no more circulation. Heart's not pumping anymore. The bacteria then in the intestines starts to multiply very rapidly. You then have your second stage, which is called bloat. The bacteria will release gases. The body will inflate. The microbes are breaking down your tissue. So already within 2 to 7 days, those microbes are breaking down this food, basically. It produces a lot of gas. The body will swell or bloat, and that's why it's called this stage, especially in the abdomen area, just because that's where all the intestines and the microbes are. There's a lot of pressure from the gases inside of the body, so sometimes fluids will leak from the body, and the odor becomes very strong. At this point in time, it's attracting a lot of different types of other organisms, flies, insects, that kind of stuff. You move on within 5 to 11 days to this active decay stage. So the tissue is basically liquefying. There's very strong odors. Insects are highly active in this spot. Basically, the carcass begins to collapse and it begins to flatten in this time. You then move on to this advanced decay. You have fewer soft tissues. The soil underneath becomes very nutrient rich. So the remaining tissues, things like the cartilage and the tendons, these are going to start then drying out in the next stage. But right now, the odors are going to persist. The carcass is going to start to collapse. A lot of tissue is going to be lost because all the insects have been feeding. And then the very last stage, depending on the environment, depending on the time of year, 10 to 25 days or more. This is going to be the dry or slash advanced decay stage. And so the dry remains basically what's happening is that the bones, the hair, sometimes the dry skin, the feathers remain, but the weather, the sun exposure, scavengers, rodents chewing on the bones, it continues to break down over time. It's just a little slower at this point. So eventually the materials start to reintegrate into the soil as minerals and that organic matter. All right, so this one's a little graphic here. Sorry about that. But this is a mule deer from Nebraska, out in western Nebraska. It was actually one of our collared, as you can tell. It had a number on it. It had a collar on it. This one was taken by a mountain lion. So in Nebraska, we do have mountain lions. They have to eat something. So right away, our biologists found this. They can tell because of where the injury was. This is a very, very fresh injury. And then you can see kind of more towards the end of the collar that stuff has been feeding on this deer. So very different than that elk picture I showed you. Nothing wanted to eat the elk because they believe it did have chronic wasting disease and animals don't want to eat that. But right away, this animal has been exposed to the elements. It's starting to smell. Animals are going to start coming in, that kind of stuff. All right, so stage one, when an animal has died, what happens next? We know biologically what's happening inside the body and the stages, but what's happening in the ecosystem and how is this continuing to move through this process? So stage one, you're going to start having scavengers. The very first visitors to a fresh carcass are typically these very large scavengers. Not always, and that's not the only thing that comes, but typically you're going to have these really large scavengers, things like coyotes, things like raccoons, things like vultures. Depends on where you are, obviously, in the world. But they're very opportunistic feeders. So they quickly come to the spot. They use their sense of smell usually to locate an easy meal. As these animals kind of tear into the carcass, they're breaking it apart. They're making it more accessible for these smaller creatures, which are going to come in next. Basically, they're ensuring that nothing goes to waste. They're not doing it on purpose. They're simply just eating and scattering things around, and over time, that helps that decomposition. This process also accelerates decomposition, exposes it to the body, to air and soil. It helps kind of speed up and break down that organic material. Also thinking about this, we think of scavengers always being large animals, but it's not always going to be large animals. You have to also have to think of insects too. And throughout this process and this presentation, I want you to think about, we've talked a lot about deer and larger animals dying. Everything dies. So you're going to have lots of bugs. You're going to have trees. You're going to have birds. You're going to have reptiles and mammals and small insects and that kind of thing. So thinking about all of those creatures contribute stuff to the soil. It's not just these large animals or these large mammals. All right. This is obviously not in Nebraska. I could not find a great video of vultures in Nebraska, but this is one of those videos that you see like from an African documentary showing how these vultures are just right away on this dead animal. They're breaking it apart. They're making it more accessible for other types of animals and even smaller organisms as well. All right, so stage one is still this breakdown. So the scavengers are coming. Basically, these scavengers are digesting their meal. They enrich the soil around because then eventually they're going to have to go to the bathroom and they leave that nutrients back into the soil. This returns really valuable resources like nitrogen and phosphorus back into the ecosystem. These scavengers also really help with controlling the spread of disease. Turkey vultures are a great one simply because they have those acidic stomachs. They can destroy that harmful bacteria. They can eat decaying meat and not get sick. And then they reduce that risk of disease spread. If there's an animal that's gotten hit on the road or that animal that was in the CWD, that elk, these animals are coming to it to eat it, getting that out of the environment. So as much as people don't like turkey vultures, they do a really good job at kind of cleaning up our environment. This initial wave of scavengers kind of lays the groundwork then for the next phase of decomposition, which are going to be your insects and your microbes. All right, so your insects are the next things that are come in. Even right away, scavengers might share that space with flies. So as the carcass begins to decompose, it becomes this magnet for an entirely new bunch of organisms. So these are going to be your insects. Flies, especially blowflies, they're going to be among the first to arrive. They're drawn in by that smell. Right away, they're already on their way because they smell it. These flies lay their eggs in the soft tissues of the carcass, depending on the species, but in a mere hour or a couple hours or a couple days, these maggots are already moving around. They're eating, they're hatching into that larva and eating those soft tissues. So this accelerates that decomposition process and they consume that tunnel through the carcass. So they're moving it around and they're making it more accessible for lots of different types of animals. They feast voraciously on the decaying flesh. And again, they're breaking down those soft tissues. Those habits also help spread the bacteria that play a role in the decomposition, basically ensuring that that process unfolds efficiently and effectively. All right, so it is insects, but it's more than just flies. So there's botflies. Obviously, we know a lot about those. They're usually the first ones that come, but there's beetles, there's ants, there's other fly species as well. So beetles do a really good job because they focus on consuming skin or bone. So there's lots of different types of beetles, especially here in Nebraska. We have carrion beetles. Just in Nebraska, we have about 20 different species of just carrion beetles. So these are beetles that are eating dead things. So at this stage, beetles, like I mentioned, they're consuming things. They're helping target different types of fluids released as the body is breaking down. At this stage, the carcass becomes kind of this hub of life, lots of movement, and there's also a lot of competition when it comes to feasting on things. Carrion beetles are one of the most noticeable animals participant in this process. In Nebraska, they thrive on that rotting meat, and they're very equipped with these special digestive systems that help kind of decrease that bacteria, aids in that neutralization of those harmful pathogens, and they can feast without suffering any of those effects. So they're like the turkey vultures of the insect world. This again is not in Nebraska. This is a gecko, but it's one of those that I don't know if you've ever seen like a dead bird or a worm on the ground. Ants are one of those that we don't really think about too much, but they're coming in, they're moving things around, they're feasting on this body, and ants are really strong. They can carry things heavier than their own body back to their area. So thinking about it's not just these large scavengers. This one was also taken in Nebraska. This is a shrew. As you can see, there's already a couple different types of species on this dead shrew. There's some flies, and then if you look underneath, you see these orange and black things. Those are going to be your carrion beetle. So I can't tell which species it is, but there's a lot of different types of species, but they're already feasting on this and they're helping just recycle this back into the environment. One of our most noticeable carrion beetles or famous carrion beetles, I guess, is going to be your American burying beetle. So this one is actually a federally listed endangered species. Nebraska's been doing a lot to help keep their populations alive, and Nebraska is kind of a hot spot for them. They're found in the less canyons, kind of in the sandhills. Burying beetles look kind of very similar. This one has a very cool little orange spot between their eyes, and they're very large. So when people do surveys, they're pretty easy to find because of those kind of distinguishing characteristics. But we bait the traps with dead rodents. So dead rats, they kind of marinate in the sun for about 6 days, and then we put them in buckets. We wait overnight, and then the beetles are drawn into that scent, and then we can count different types of carrion beetles, just seeing what's coming in to eat that flesh. All right, so then you have your stage three. This is your microbe. So although insects play a really heavy role in the decomposition process, the real like heavy lifting comes at a microscopic level. So it's these microbes. So bacteria, the fungi, they serve as this true engine of decomposition. So they're breaking down this organic material into simpler compounds. So nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon, all of these really essential nutrients that need to go back into the soil. They spring into action like immediately, even though we can't see them necessarily, but they colonize the carcass, they start their disassembly. As the other larger scavengers are kind of moving the remains around, this also helps spread the microbes through the body as well. And so there is this like symbiotic relationship between these larger organisms and the microbes, kind of ensuring that there's a more efficient decomposition process. All right, so don't forget fungi. So fungi will occur. They cause, excuse me, the bacteria will break down the tissues. They produce gases like methane and carbon dioxide, which causes the carcass usually to bloat. So bloating makes this more visible to lots of different types of scavengers and also more accessible. And it also creates this environment that's kind of rich in these volatile compounds, and it attracts more insects and small animals. So the fungi are really good at breaking down that tougher material like cartilage and bone. So they slowly release those nutrients that are stored within those things. They break down tougher materials, which is really crucial in returning that stuff back to the environment. So it promotes plant growth. And then it also secretes enzymes that dissolve hard tissues. Together, bacteria and fungi create this really dynamic and efficient decomposition process. So it ensures that ultimately nothing will go to waste and that life can kind of continue to flourish. All right, so this is a picture, it's a dead log, but you can just kind of see how many fungi are on this. So this is a fungi's job. This is them breaking down things. Without fungi, we would have so many more or so much more dead material in the forests and in our own ecosystem. So they do a lot to help break down. They're just those nutrient recyclers. All right, and then finally you have this nutrient release. So as the carcass decomposes, the nutrients are released into the soil and they seep slowly into the soil. So it enriches the soil in ways that could not occur without this animal's death. So those vital elements like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, they leach into the ground and it boosts this area and it signals like this growth of plant life. There's a sudden influx, which creates this really fertile environment. It makes the area vibrant, more lush, and it even attracts more diverse species. So the nutrients that are released, it can flourish in the soil for weeks, months, even years, and that contributes to that ongoing plant growth and soil fertility. All right, so here's another animal from Nebraska. This was also another mule deer. It was also another collared deer. As you can see, certain areas of the body have been really consumed. Once this is kind of dried out, a lot of insects, a lot of microbes, they move on to the next thing or they die. So this leaves those hard tissues that slowly leach back into the soil. So it's giving that area a really great spot and really diverse plant life. But again, it's also dependent upon the weather, the season, what this decomposition process will look like. All right, so what are these long-term effects? So after an animal dies in this ecosystem, what are these long-term effects of what happens to that area? So like we just talked about, the bones and the hard tissues, they persist in the environment. The teeth and those keratin-based things like hair or hooves, they can last years or even decades. So these slowly release minerals into the soil. They're crucial for plants, microorganisms, and even small animals. Lots of mice will chew on those bones to get extra calcium, especially in wintertime. Even things like rabbits and deer have been known to munch on other bones because they need the calcium. So it gives food for lots of other animals. It also enriches the soil and that plant composition. So the nutrients from decomposition create these fertility hotspots in the soil. Certain plants grow better in these enriched areas. Sometimes it even alters the entire plant community over time. Places like grasslands or forests, they can subtly shift which species dominate. So if there's a lot of animals that die in this area, certain plants are going to take over and they're going to dominate in that spot versus if that animal had not died in those areas. There's also an effect on scavenger and predator populations. So although that soft tissue is gone, those bones and those carcass sites still provide food for specialized scavengers. So it temporarily increases scavenger populations. They can occur if multiple carcasses are present. It influences those local predator-prey dynamics as well. And then you have these microhabitats for other organisms. So those bones and those remaining organic material, it can provide shelter for insects, fungi, mosses, even small amphibians and reptiles. So these sites become these micro ecosystems in themselves. All right, so that was kind of like the decomposition process. What happens? What does this look like? But there's also those variations. I kind of mentioned earlier, like what season is it? What is the habitat like? So we're going to get into this a little bit, just like how does the season, the habitat really affect that decomposition? Because it is quite different. So if an animal dies or a plant or tree or something dies in the forest, the decomposition rate does not happen the same as other organ or other ecosystems or other habitats. So it really depends on the type of ecosystem and its climate. It determines how fast that organic material breaks down and how those nutrients are recycled. So forests, they're typically pretty moist. They're shaded. They have rich in decomposers. There's usually lots of fungi, beetles, and bacteria. It's not a bad place at all to have those those micro ecosystems. The leaf litter, the fallen logs, those dead animals, they really decompose relatively quickly just because of the humidity, those stable temperatures, and they're usually near the ground. If you're in a grassland, decomposition's a little bit slower. The sun, the wind dries out the carcass and the plant matter. It really reduces that microbial activity. So grasslands are often more open, they're windier, they're drier than forests. Things like, or scavengers like coyotes, badgers, vultures, they play a large role in removing that soft tissue. I think I've mentioned this before, but there was a really cool YouTube video. I think it was in Utah. The this cow died in a pasture, and this badger dug a hole underneath the cow and completely buried this cow. They caught a time-lapse video on it, but over time, this badger basically just moved the soil underneath this cow and shrunk the cow into the ground and had its own cache system after that. So that badger, it was just trying to basically cache some food, but it's doing a great service to that spot in that environment. It's already burying that animal. The insects, the minerals are going to then leach into the soil. So he did a great job. But it's a cool video to show this tiny little badger burying this huge cow. Um, but for example, if the rain comes, the decomposition will also speed up as the bacteria and the fungi kind of reactivate to that water. So, for instance, like in the sandhills of Nebraska, you might find lots of bones and dried plant stalks. They can remain visible for years just simply because there's such a low moisture content in those grassland areas. All right, what about wetlands? There's lots of moisture, there's lots of microbial activity, kind of accelerates this idea of decomposition. Some plant and animal matter can become partially preserved in mud, or sometimes even this stuff called peat. So basically, this high moisture content depends on the type of wetland, but it can accelerate the decomposition. But there's also oxygen poor or this anaerobic conditions that can slow certain processes. So wetlands kind of act like these nutrient sponges. They slowly release this decomposed matter into water ecosystems. So in our rainwater basin area, kind of around the Grand Island, Hastings area, there's a lot of decaying plant material and it forms this really rich what's called muck. It supports insect larvae, amphibians, aquatic plants. So all that organic matter is just kind of sitting there, but it's a great spot for lots of different types of organisms. So again, nothing's wasted, but it creates new life after that. All right, what about the desert? I know we don't have deserts in Nebraska, but they are hot, they're dry, there's a lot of exposed conditions. They cause really rapid drying of the carcass. So it almost becomes like this mummification process rather than decay. There's very few decomposers and they can't really function without moisture. So there's a lot of wind. Scavengers like birds and insects kind of become the primary forces of that decomposition. It's not microbes and it's not fungi. Um, so when rain does occur, those previous remains kind of may decompose very quickly. So it can last a while, and then if it rains, the decomposition process goes, and then stops for a while. So it's kind of an interesting ecosystem. All right, so here's a mummified, this is a rat, but this is what that mummification process looks like. So it is so dry. Nothing is breaking this down. So it is not the fungi, it's not the plants, it's not the insects. Nothing is literally breaking this down because it's literally like plastic now. It is dry. All right, what about the seasons? So winter, so cold temperatures slow or even pause completely decomposition. Insects and microbes, they're inactive, they're dormant for the season. This frozen ground kind of prevents fluids from entering the soil and it delays this nutrient recycling process. Scavengers may also feed on carcasses, but overall the activity is going to be much slower in the winter time. So if you're an animal that dies in the winter, it might be until December, or if you die in December, it might till be like early spring before that nutrients gets leached into the soil. Basically, it's going to be largely preserved until that spring thaw. All right, so here's an animal that died in the winter. You can still see the fur very easily, but a lot of the bones are still here. The hooves are still around. The face looks pretty eaten on this one. But again, this is like pausing that decomposition process. And then once that spring thaws, all these microbes, all these insects are active again, and they will start to break this down. All right, so then other extreme, what about summer? There's lots of warmth, there's moisture, it really speeds up that bacterial growth and also that insect activity. So uh, these maggots, these beetles, fungi, they thrive in this environment. They break down those tissues very quickly. Excuse me. And then nutrients will enter the soil very rapidly and they fuel that summer plant growth. So like an example, if a dead rabbit dies in July, it might almost completely be decomposed in about 2 weeks. So that's just how fast this decomposition process goes. All right, so then what are these ecosystem-wide impacts? So we talk about this little area that if this deer dies, here's the ecosystem and here's the effects in that area. But what about the bigger picture? So ecosystem-wide impacts. So if animals die or these carcasses are left, it supports those decomposer and scavenger populations. So every carcass provides a temporary, but it's also a very vital food source for dozens of species. So scavengers like coyotes, vultures, raccoons, they largely depend on carrion. So especially when live prey is very scarce. Those insects, those flies, ants, they rely on a lot of this dead material to complete their life cycle. The fungi and the bacteria will flourish around these decaying places, and it forms this really base, the base for nutrient recycling network. A single deer carcass can feed scavengers, and it can provide a habitat for over 400 species of insects, and it also fertilizes the soil for nearby plants. Just that one single deer carcass. It also improves soil fertility and plant growth. So decomposition progresses. Nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, they seep into the soil. They create these fertility islands that are small areas with really productive plant growth. The enriched vegetation also attracts herbivores. It continues the energy flow throughout the ecosystem. If it's in a prairie, those areas where really large animals like bison usually once roam the area, they have denser, greener vegetation, even years later after this animal has died. It also influences predator-prey and species interactions. So scavengers, vultures, I almost said volcanoes, vultures and coyotes together may compete or even cooperate with each other, but they have these really cool, complex social dynamics. If there's a lot of carrion or those dead animals, it can reduce hunting pressure on live prey, and as predators kind of turn to easier meals like that carrion on the ground. And then carcasses attract predators. It increases competition or even sometimes conflict among species. And then after ecosystem structure over time, it affects it. So that continuous decomposition over time, it's a long-term soil composition and it changes the biodiversity of an area. So it sometimes is a great area for these remaining really rare plant species that thrive in those nutrient-rich areas. With an abundance of scavengers, it supports higher trophic levels and it strengthens that ecosystem resilience. And then the death of one animal doesn't end its role in nature, but it creates opportunities for countless others. All right, and then really quickly, we talked about scavengers quite a bit, but I really want to hit on a few of them, and then they're like specialized adaptations and kind of the oddities that they have to deal with being a scavenger. So the ones I've kind of mentioned before throughout this presentation, turkey vultures, turkey vultures are really awesome, large birds in Nebraska. They're found lots of places, but they have these acidic stomachs, so strong they can digest carcasses. If they have anthrax, if they have botulism, would kill most other animals. They eat them just fine. They have this featherless head, so they can reach into a carcass and not get dirty. But also, they keep clean. They're actually very clean birds. They're not super messy. So I think I saw a study one time that said each turkey vulture in its average lifetime contributes about $10 million in cleanup. So instead of a person out there going along the road, cleaning up things, each turkey vulture is cleaning up that much in the environment. So they definitely don't get enough credit. Coyotes are really opportunistic. A lot of people don't like them. They see them as big, large predators, but they scavenge a lot. Roadkill, even in the wintertime. They have really powerful noses that they can detect carrion from miles away. It helps them find an easy meal, especially when prey is really scarce. Crows. Crows are scavengers. They're really clever, but they don't just eat carrion. The people have seen them actually calling other crows over when they find a carcass, and they also are protecting the ecosystem from this risk of disease and this kind of risk of predators as well. And then you have your raccoons and your possums. So both considered scavengers in Nebraska. They pretty much eat anything they will come across, from insects to dead animals. They're helping prevent a lot of waste from accumulating in the ecosystem. There's a lot of possums and a lot of raccoons out there, and they're doing a really good job at keeping our environment clean. All right, and then you also have the plants and fungi. This shelf fungi, which is pictured right here, and stuff called puffballs, they're found on fallen logs, tree stumps throughout the woodlands. They're really good decomposers, especially of dead wood. So they break down the really tough parts of the barks and the cellulose, and then that returns the carbon back into the soil. There's this stuff called foxfire fungi. Some decaying logs in eastern Nebraska forests, they faintly glow in the dark because they're bioluminescent. So it's kind of eerie, but it's kind of neat. Um, Even saying that death can be luminous. And then you have your carrion flowers. They're pretty rare here, but there are a few natives that mimic the smell of dead things. I'm sure most of us have heard of like a corpse flower before. They only bloom certain times of their life, like once. It's very, very rare, but they smell like dead, rotting meat because those are the pollinators that come to them. They eat, they think they're getting something to eat. They come get sticky and then they fly off and pollinate some more. So the whole purpose in nature is that they're using that scent of death. And then leaf litter and fungi and bacteria. These microscopic decomposers, they have this vast underground network that kind of keeps the prairie soils rich and fertile, and it supports native grasses and wildflowers. All right, and then one thing I did want to talk about, because we didn't mention it all, what about decomposition in water? So if an animal or fish dies in the water, what does this look like? So it's a slower process. Water limits the amount of oxygen, so decomposition takes longer, and it really relies on that anaerobic or the absence of oxygen bacteria. So this often results in kind of that marshy smell that many of us associate with water. It's the scent of microbes basically doing their work. And then you have your aquatic scavengers, your crayfish, your snails, catfish, channel catfish, your blue catfish. They're carrion scavengers. They're eating stuff off the bottoms, and they're helping break down those dead plants, fish, materials, and other organic matter. And then you have your nutrient recycling in your wetlands. So there's dead plant material, it settles, and it decomposes at the bottom. So it feeds the next generation of algae, invertebrates, and fish, and it makes wetlands some of the most like productive ecosystems in the world and also in Nebraska. And then you have this like seasonal twist. So in the winter, when the lakes freeze, oxygen levels will drop and decomposition slows dramatically. Once you have that ice melt in the spring, the microbial activity kind of kicks back up and it recycles like months worth of organic material. So decomposition in the water is a little bit different, but overall it has the same process. And then, so here's a really cool bison, or sorry, it's a cow. This is a cow skull that was found in a wetland. It's pretty decomposed, but I thought it was a cool picture. And then here's another collared deer. As you can see, the face is pretty much gone. All the animals that are not wanting to get in the water have gotten in there. But again, the decomposition process in the water is a little slower. But over time, this will get broken down and it leaches all that stuff back into the wetland, the pond. Probably not a great place you want to go swimming, but it doesn't mean that it's nasty. It is a place where all of that nutrients goes back to get recycled. Here's a dead fish. So this was an area that was wet and completely dried out. Poor fish didn't have a chance. But you can see all the scales. They look like little leaves, but this is a fish. And with that, we are done. So, so we have our next one. We only got two more left in the year. We have pronghorn in a couple weeks, and then we'll be talking about shrikes, which are some really cool birds in December. So, again, if you missed part of this and want to watch it, it is being recorded. We will put it on our Nebraska Game and Parks Education YouTube channel. If you really liked, if you really liked this, we have about 90 different, I don't know what I did, 90 different videos on here. And what you can do, just gonna, there we go. We have about 90 different videos of science of, so lots of different topics that you can look at and watch and learn more about. We also have our Facebook and our Instagram where we have upcoming events and just kind of fun facts and kind of keeping up what's happening in Nebraska. And then we have our Nebraska Wildlife Education website as well. So everyone, regardless if they were here or not, that registered for this program will receive an email from me with links to the next Science of, links to this on our YouTube, And I'll also put some unique links in here so you can learn more about death and decomposition as well. So that'll probably come on Monday. If you have ideas that you'd really like us to cover as far as the science of that we haven't yet, please fill out those evaluations and help us out and let us know. So otherwise, let me check the comments and the chats here really fast. It always worries me when I don't see stuff in the chat because it's like, did I overwhelm you, or are you confused, or is it just that no one wants to chat? And that's totally fine too. So if you have anything, please email me. Please let me know. Otherwise, thanks for sharing your Thursday with me. Everyone have a great Halloween tomorrow and stay safe. And we will see you in November. So thank you, everyone. Thank you.